Hello and welcome to the official YouTube channel of EduShort for your preparation of UGC NET Paper 2 Economics examination. So, if you are someone who is following my lectures on international economics, you will know that in the previous video, which is the first video that I have uploaded on international economics, there we have started off with some of the theories of international trade. So basically, we have covered what is mercantilism, what is absolute advantage theory of Adam Smith, what is the comparative advantage theory of David Ricardo, and what is the opportunity cost theory of Haberler, right? So these are the few international trade theories that we have already discussed in details in our previous video. Now, in today's video, what we will do, we will start off with our discussion on Heckscher-Ohlin model of trade. So Heckscher-Ohlin trade theory is known as the modern theory of trade, which is the absolute foundation on which every subsequent theory has built itself, right? So Heckscher-Ohlin is the foundation of the modern trade theory. Not only that, modern international economics as a branch of economics stands on this Heckscher-Ohlin model. So this is a very important topic. Now, since this is a kind of revision session, in our paid batch, we do a detailed discussion on that. For every model, we do separate analysis and we explain every model in detail. But since in YouTube, I don't have much time to cover everything, you can treat this as a revision session where what we will do, I have made this is a kind of summary note you can consider where I have, firstly given you the information who propounded the theory in which year. That information will be very much required to answer the sequencing kind of question that they ask you in your UGC NET, right? So they will give you 4 to 5 trade theories and they will, ask you to order all of them in the year in which they had appeared, right? So depending on the year of their appearance in the subject, they will ask you questions on that. So I have included that. And then in the next point, I have mentioned all the important propositions. What is the main statement? What is this theory is all about? So only that much I have included, and any important implication, if it is there, then I have included that. If you want to know more about this, you can join our paid batch where we do detailed discussion of everything. So with that, let us go into this discussion of Heckscher-Ohlin model and all the other subsequent things that you want to understand for your UGC NET exam. So what is Heckscher-Ohlin model? Heckscher-Ohlin, as you can see, this theory was developed by Swedish economist Eli Heckscher in the year 1919 and his student, his PhD student Bertil Ohlin in the year 1933. So this is the first piece of information, the year and the two economists who has propounded this theory. This has to be remembered. Now, what is the main proposition of this theory? This theory tells you the countries which are rich in labor will export labor intensive goods. Countries which are rich in capital will export capital intensive goods. The basis of trade. The basis of trade is the difference in the availability of resource. That is also known as the factoring out. So in very simple words, so Heckscher-Ohlin is basically a 2x2x2 model. So you have two countries, two commodities, and two factors of production, right? Two countries. So suppose one and two nations are there. Two commodities, suppose X and Y, two goods are there in your economy that you are trying to produce, and two factors of production, namely labor and capital. Now, what this theorem tells you is that suppose X is a good which is labor intensive in nature. What is intensiveness? So for the production of X, you need more labor with respect to capital. So this labor capital ratio. So if I say X is labor, so I have given you the definition of intensiveness and abundance. So what is labor intensiveness? The L by K ratio. So labor required per unit of capital in the production of X, that will be strictly greater than the labor capital ratio that you need for the production of Y. If this criteria is satisfied, you will say that X is a labor intensive good and Y is a capital intensive good, because for capital intensiveness, this ratio will only change. So capital labor ratio, then you will take the capital labor ratio, right? So one good is the labor intensive good, one good is the capital intensive good. Now, according to Heckscher-Ohlin model, what will happen? The labor, suppose in the nation one, you have labor abundance. If nation one is labor abundant, that is the physical amount of labor that is present in the country one is strictly greater than the physical amount of labor that is present in country two. If this is the scenario, then country one will incompletely specialize in the production of X and country 2 will incompletely specialize in the production of Y, and they will export and import from each other. Right. So firstly, to understand this completely, I have given you this, definition of factor intensity and factor abundance. Please understand this thing. Intensity, as I've told you, it is simply the capital labor ratio. Right. If you need more labor than per unit of capital to produce a good, the good will become labor intensive, and vice versa. If you need more capital per unit of labor, the good will become capital intensive. That is there. So it is with respect to the good. Factor intensity is measured with respect to the goods. But factor abundance is a concept which is related to the economy as a whole. Factor abundance is a concept which is related to the economy as a whole. Now you can explain abundance in two ways. First is the physical definition, another one is the price definition. I have given just one-liner definition of it. Here in this note, you will not find details of anything. You will just find the concept, just one-liner summary of all the concepts. So if you are a serious candidate and you're preparing for this exam very long, please go into the details also, because that is absolute foundation of this topic, right? This is a revision session, so I'll stick to the summary version of it. So factor abundance, in case of physical definition, what this tells you is that if the total physical amount of labor is present, total physical amount of labor that is present in your economy is strictly greater than the total physical amount of labor that is present in some other economy, then your nation will be labor abundant. So simply in India, suppose India, US example, suppose in India you have, say, 100 million laborers are present. So that will be strictly greater than the number, suppose in US you have 90 million. So I'm just giving an example. It's not a good example, I know. But from intuition also, India is the most populous country in the world. So India is a labor abundant country, which means the total physical amount of labor, total laborers that are present in India is strictly greater than the amount of laborers who are present in US. So in that sense, economy. So abundance is a concept related to economy. Intensity is a concept which is related to the good. So what Heckscher-Ohlin theorem tells you is that, see here, states that a country will specialize, incompletely specialize. What is incomplete specialization? Incomplete means, suppose you are a labor abundant nation. So according to Heckscher-Ohlin model, you should specialize in the labor intensive good. But it is not that you are not producing the other good. So you are taking up two goods into account. If you are a labor abundant nation and X is labor intensive good, you are producing X more than the good Y. But it is not that production of good Y is zero, which we have seen in case of complete specialization, in case of Adam Smith's theory, in case of David Ricardo's theory, in case of Haber-Loy's theory. We have seen complete specialization, where if you are specializing in one particular good, you will produce only that particular good. All your resources will be devoted for that particular good only. None of your resources will be devoted for the other good. But this is one of the exceptions in case of Heckscher-Ohlin. That is why it is more realistic scenario. It's not that. So economies usually produce all the goods in some particular amount. So if you are a labor abundant country, X is a labor abundant good, you will produce more X than Y. So that is what is known as the incomplete specialization. So incompletely will produce, specialize, they will produce and export the goods whose production requires a relatively large amount of the factor in which the country is relatively endowed with. And that is a capital abundant country will tend to specialize in capital intensive goods in exchange for the labor intensive, right? So I hope this physical definition is clear. So if you understood the physical definition, price definition is just a consequence of that. If a factor is present in your economy in huge abundance, then the price of each unit of the factor will be lower, right? For example, in India, since laborers are huge in abundance, you can find laborers in abundance in India. That is why price of each unit of labor is very less. You will find cheap labor in India. The price that you will pay for each unit of labor for working in India is way lesser than the price you will pay. So per capita income in US is also more. So the laborers will get more wage in US than in India due to this abundance concept, right? If you have in US, the capital price is more. In India, labor, what I'm saying, yeah. So in case of India, since laborers are more than the amount of capital, so the wage will be less, but the rent will be more. The rental price of capital will be more. And it is just the reverse in case of US. In case of US, The wages will be more, but the rental will be less because capital is abundant in that case, right? So see, according to the price definition, a country is capital abundant if the ratio of rental price of capital to the price of labor, which is this ratio, price of capital upon price of labor, which you can take rental to wage ratio also, it is lower than the other country. So if your physical amount of capital is more, then the wage that you will get, that will be lower than the other country, right? If the labor isn't abundant, then the price that you will pay for that labor, that will be lower. That is what is the price. So this is exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing in two different ways you can define. So this was about the Heckscher-Ohlin model. Now let us go to some of the empirical testing. So we are saying that Heckscher-Ohlin is the modern theory of trade. So firstly, we will have to verify that whether it is true or not. We have to verify that. To do that, we have to undertake certain empirical tests. So the first and the most important empirical test that was done, the first comprehensive and the most detailed empirical test is of the Heckscher-Ohlin model was conducted by Vasily W. Leontief. So this Leontief first undertook the empirical test to actually test empirically. Empirically means with the help of data. He has tried to prove that Heckscher-Ohlin holds in real life scenarios or not. And he has used the United States trade data of 1947 and he published his report in 1951. So you, in some books, in some articles, you will find this to be 53. So basically 1950s, 51 to 53. In 1950s, Leontief paradox came into being. So according to Heckscher-Ohlin model, what should US do? If there is no violation of Heckscher-Ohlin, United States is a capital abundant country. So United States should ideally be incompletely specializing in capital intensive goods, and they should export capital intensive goods and they should import labor intensive goods. That should happen if there is no violation. But what Leontief found out is just the opposite. That is why it's a paradox. That see, Leontief found that US import substitutes were 30% more capital intensive than the US exports in 1940. So US, since it is a capital abundant country, US should export capital intensive goods and US should import labor abundant goods, right? This should happen if Heckscher-Ohlin model is true. But what Leontief found is just the opposite. Leontief found that the imports that US is doing is 30% more capital intensive instead of being labor intensive. See here, 30% more capital intensive than the exports in 1947. So that is why US seem to be export labor intensive commodities and import capital intensive commodities, which is a strict violation of the propositions of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. That is why it is known as a paradox. And this is a paradoxical result, which is just the opposite of Heckscher-Ohlin model, which is predicted. And this is famously known as the Leontief paradox. And they ask you this kind of data when this result was published. Also, one important thing is that Leontief has used his own invention, namely input-output table. So to test this Heckscher-Ohlin model empirically, input-output model. So if you are an economics student in your undergraduate level, I hope you have studied this concept of input-output table. So this input-output table was also propounded by Leontief to test the Heckscher-Ohlin model empirically. And this is the note. You will find this note in the Telegram group. If you haven't joined the Telegram group of EduShort, please do that. And otherwise, you can basically take a screenshot and read this in your free time. Now, there are some associated concepts which I wanted to discuss. Again, I have given you just one-liner, only the essence of these things. They are all huge, topics in international economics that we do in our paid batch, but here, due to constraints, we can't do that. If you want to learn from me, you can join the paid batch that is available, and you will get the detailed notes and the lecture videos, right? So see, what is factor intensity reversal? Factor intensity reversal is a violation of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. See, what is that? So now every subsequent topic that we do, we will be associated with Heckscher-Ohlin model, and we will see what are the corollaries from that, what will be the violations from that, and some other theorems that we will derive. So factor intensity reversal is violations of one of the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin model. So one of the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin model says that suppose you have two goods X and Y. So according to the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin, if you say that X is a labor intensive good, then X has to be labor intensive in both the countries. right? In nation 1 and in nation 2, in both the countries, X has to be labor intensive. And if you say Y is capital intensive, then in nation 1 and nation 2, in both the countries, Y, the good Y has to be capital. If this assumption gets validated, you get something called factor intensity reversal. See here, factor intensity reversal refers to the situation where a given commodity is labor intensive commodity in the labor abundant country, but it becomes capital abundant when it goes into the capital abundant country. So you have Heckscher-Ohlin is a 2 cross 2 cross 2 model, as I've told you. So you have two nations, you have two goods, X and Y, and you have two nations, you have two goods, and you have two factors of production. Now, what I'm saying is that suppose one country is labor abundant and one country is capital abundant, right? Now, X is a labor intensive good in the labor abundant country and Y is the capital intensive good in the, sorry for that. If X is a labor intensive good, it is labor intensive only in the labor abundant country. But the same good X is becoming capital intensive in the capital abundant country. If this is the situation, then you get something called factor intensity reversal. And if factor intensity reversal is present, Heckscher-Ohlin model no longer holds. So it is a strict violation of the assumptions of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. So this is also a very important concept. Right, let us move to the new derivation. This is the fact. The next theorem that we will discuss is the factor price equalization. It is just a corollary of Heckscher-Ohlin model, and it was Paul A. Samuelson. It is important. Paul A. Samuelson, who rigorously pointed out that this factor price equalization theorem will hold in the year 1949. Again, the years are important. So, factor price equalization is alternatively known as Heckscher-Ohlin Samuelson theorem. So, since for the for this factor price equalization theorem to hold, you strictly need to have this Heckscher-Ohlin, all the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin model valid. That is why it is known as Heckscher-Ohlin Samuelson theorem. So only when Heckscher-Ohlin theorem holds true, this factor price equalization holds true. Now, what is the main statement of this model? This is given in this point, that given the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin, if all the assumptions of Heckscher-Ohlin model holds, factor price equalization theorem says free international trade, free. So there is no tariff, there is no barrier, there is no transportation cost, no barriers is there. If free international trade is allowed, then it will equalize the factor prices between countries relatively and absolutely. And international trade serves as a substitute for the international mobility of factors. So what this theorem tells you is that if you promote free trade, there is no barriers, any country can trade with any other country without any sort of restrictions, then the reward that the factors will get. So reward is basically wages and rentals. Basically, you have two factors of production. Wage is the reward for labor and rental is the reward for capital. So what will happen is that the wages that are there in the two different countries, so wages that the laborers will get in nation 1, that will exactly be equal to the wages that the laborers will get in nation 2. Similarly, for rental, in absolute sense, these are the equalization in absolute sense. And if they are absolutely equal, they will be relatively equal as well. W by R in the country 1, that will be exactly equals to W by R in country 2. So this is the equalization in the relative sense, and this is the equalization in the absolute sense. This will hold. And eventually, we will see in factor price equalization, we know that there is a one-to-one relationship between W by R and the relative prices of the commodity. So there is a relationship is there. So now if the wages, the relative wages are also equalized, then the commodity prices in the two nations will also equalize. Now, if the relative and the absolute wages are equal, it will serve, international trade will serve as a substitute for the mobility of factors. So mobility of factors will be ensured. Suppose US and India is the two countries that we are talking about. Now the wages that you are getting in India, if it is absolutely the same as the wages that you will get in US, you as a laborer will be indifferent between working in India. Yes, there are certain other factors, lifestyle choices and many other things are there. But purely if your concern is the wage, purely if you are working, so here we see labor theory of value. We always try to, as a laborer, we always see what is the wage. What if the wage is more in some other nation, we go there. So for the mobility, wage plays a very crucial role. So that is what this factor equalization theorem tells you, that if you promote free international trade, then the wages and so basically the rewards, the real rewards for the factors, they will be absolutely equal in both the nations, both in the absolute sense and in the relative sense. Now, since we know in international economics, wages, the relative rewards and the relative prices of the commodity have a one-to-one relationship. So basically, you start. This is the scenario of one country. This is the scenario of the other country. Due to international trade, they will both meet up at a common point. They will all meet up at a common point. So there will be a unique W by R ratio, which is this. W by R in the first country is equals to this. This you can assume to be W by R star. A common wage rental ratio. This will be ensured, and here you will have a common price ratio as well. One-to-one relationship. One-to-one relationship is existing. So commodity relatives in the relative sense, commodity prices will also be equalized, and the wages rentals, they will also be equalized. That is the essence of factor price equalization, right? So again, if you are someone who is interested, you will also do the diagram for your knowledge, but here I can't do that, right? So next up, we have this Stolper-Samuelson. So I have in this note, you will find all the important topics that you need to do, basically. If you are someone who is watching me on YouTube, please in your free time, read about all these topics in detail. So here I am just giving you a quick overview of what are the things you need to do and in what depth you need to do. So Stolper-Samuelson theorem gives you if the Px upon Py, if this ratio is being changed, what will be the effect of that on the wage rental ratio? This is what is given by the Stolper-Samuelson. See here, it is a theorem that postulates that an increase in the relative prices, if this ratio is disturbed due to some tariff, suppose a price of good X rises. If that happens, what will be the effect on the real rewards of the factor? So, for example, as a result of tariff raises the real return or earnings of the factor that used intensively in the production of the commodity. Thus, the real return of the nation's scarce factor of production will rise due to imposition of tariff. So, the only thing that you need to remember in Stolper-Samuelson is that if a tariff is imposed, suppose a tariff of rate T is been imposed, for that what will happen? This relative price ratio will be, relative commodity price will be disturbed, as a result of which country's scarce factor will gain. Country's scarce factor will gain and country's abundant factor will lose. That is the only result that is been derived from the Stolper-Samuelson, which is different from the usual trade. If there is no tariff, and no barriers present, then international trade will always benefit the abundant factor and it will always hurt the scarce factor. So Stolper-Samuelson theorem just says the reverse of that. If tariff is present, then the scarce factor of the nation, so there is derivation and all diagrams and all to explain. I'm just giving you the proposition, main finding, if tariff is there, scarce factor of the nation will gain from the trade and the abundant factor will lose from the trade. And here I have given you an example to illustrate that. For example, nation 2 is a capital abundant country, imposes import tariff on the commodity X, which is a labor intensive. So it is a capital abundant country, but it imposes a tariff on the import tariff. So what will happen? PX will rise. For the domestic consumers, PX will rise. So domestic means the consumers of nation 2. For them, the PX will rise. So PX by PY, this ratio will also rise for the domestic producers and consumers. So the real wage of labor will also rise. So I have just told you there is a one-to-one relationship between W by R and PX PY. Right. So if the PX PY, this ratio rises, W by R will also rise. So W by R is basically the relative, in the relative sense, the wage of the laborers will rise with respect to the rental, right? The wage of the laborers will rise with respect to the rental. So the scarce factor in with respect to the nation 2, since it is a capital abundant country, labor is the scarce factor, but we see the W by R ratio is rising. So that is why the scarce factor will gain from international trade if tariff is present, and it will be just the reverse, the abundant factor will lose. Right? So this is the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. And Metzler paradox is just an exception of the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. As you can see, the conclusion is just the opposite. So Metzler said that even if tariff is present, scarce factor will lose and the abundant factor will gain. So even with the tariff imposition, the actual result, the original result of international trade, the originality of the international trade will be maintained, which is given by Metzler. So you can read this thing. Metzler concluded that income distribution will improve in favor of the abundant factor against the scarce factor, which is just the opposite of the Stolper-Samuelson. Let me quickly show you. So these are all the topics which are closely associated with the Heckscher-Ohlin model. We have covered that. Now there are some additional topics which I haven't gone in details into, but I just wanted to show you what are the topics you need to do for your preparation and what are the things which are important. See all the additional topics. The first topic that you need to know very well is the intra-industry tree. So inter-industry versus intra-industry. Inter means what? Inter-industry means you are trading with two absolutely different commodities with absolutely two different industries. So for example, in India, suppose we produce cloth, so textile industry, and in US, suppose you produce the computer. Just for an example, I'm saying. So India will specialize in cloth and it will export it to US, and US will produce computer and it will export it to India. So these two commodities, cloth and computer, they are two absolutely different commodities from different industries. One is from the textile industry, one is from the IT industry, you can say, technology sector, IT industry, you can say, right? So if this kind of commodity is being traded with each other, it is known as inter-industry trade. Inter-industry, two different industries. What happens? Suppose I say BMW and say Renault. So they are two different car brands, right? I hope you know this. BMW is a famous car brand and Renault is also another car brand. Now suppose Germany is producing BMW cars and France is producing Renault cars, and they trade with each other. They specialize completely, incompletely, they specialize and trade with each other. Now here what you see is that the trading is happening within the same industry. Both the goods are from the same industry. Both are automotive industry, automobile industry, right? Car industry, automobile industry, you can say. So both BMW and Renault are the similar cars. They are essentially cars, but they will have some different features. Product differentiation is very prevalent. BMW will give you some special features. Renault will give you some special features. So product differentiation is there, but the trade is happening within the same industry. This is known as intra-industry trade. This situation is known as intra-industry trade. So please learn about intra-industry trade. Here I have given you the basis of trade. This is a very important question from your UGC NET point of view. That in case of intra-industry trade, the basis of trade is product differentiation and economies of scale. So they directly ask you this question. Which kind of trade is based on this product differentiation economics? So product differentiation, you can understand. You have to give some special feature for different branding. Otherwise, no one will purchase from you. And economies of scale means if you produce in bulk, you will get a cost advantage. Right? As you keep on producing more and more amount of a good, the per unit price of producing the good is going down. So for example, average cost basically. Average cost is total cost by the quantity produced. So if your quantity produced is more, the average cost will come down. Right? Quantity produced more, the average cost is the basically the cost of producing the unit, basically average cost that you have to spend, that is lowering. Now that is known as the economy. So if you produce in bulk, you will have a cost advantage. So these are the two bases of trade. Now how do you measure this intra-industry trade? There is an index for that which I have written here. So please learn about this index. It lies between 0 and 1. It can take the value 0 and 1. So if it takes the value 0, there is no degree of intra-industry trade. If it is 1, maximum degree of intra-industry trade is there. So this is one of the additional topics which you should know for your exam. Now, the second thing that you should know is the trade based on technological differences. So in Heckscher-Ohlin model, we have kept the technology parameter at a constant level. We said that there is no scope of innovation, no scope of R&D, no scope of innovating new ideas and all, but which is absolutely not possible in real life. In real life, we see in every other day, you see a new AI tool, a new technology is being developing. So technology has a role to play in case of international trade. And to depict that, we have two different models. First is the technology gap model, which was introduced by Michael D. Posner in the year 1961. And it is also known as imitation lag hypothesis. So again, I have not gone into details. In the paid batch, we do this in details. And there is product cycle theory. Please read about this thing. Product cycle theory is also a generalization. It's based on the technology gap model, but it is a more general version of that extension of this technology gap model, which was developed by Raymond Werner in the year 1966. So, who propounded the theory, in which year it was propounded, and what are the main essence of the theory that you must know? In product cycle theory, you have 5 different stages, right? 5 different stages of a new product. The life cycle of a new product has been depicted by 5 different stages. And in UGC NET, in every year, they give you 1 or 2 questions from these stages. In which stage what has happened? In which stage what has happened? So please prepare this product cycle theory well. Now the next topic is economic growth and international trade. Here we need to know about what is the Rybczynski theory. So basically, in case of economic growth, we say if the physical amount of the factors of production are going up, then what will be the impact of that on international trade? Suppose L and K both doubles. Then what will happen? The production possibility frontier itself will shift up. So the potential for the economy will grow. And if they are both rising in the same proportion, that will be balanced growth. But if there is disproportional growth in the factor, there will be disproportional growth as in the economy also. Now, if the factors are changed, which is also a relaxation of the assumption of Heckscher-Ohlin. In Heckscher-Ohlin, we say a constant factor endowments are not being changed. So in Rybczynski theorem, what we see, Rybczynski, T.M. Rybczynski, he published a paper in 1955, investigated the effect of increase in the quantity of a factor of production upon not only production but also consumption and the terms of trade. So basically, if you increase one of the factors of production, suppose labor increases, what will happen to the international trade for the two goods from the point of view of the two? So what Rybczynski said was that if X is a labor intensive good and you increase the amount of labor in your production process, then the production of X will increase, at the same time production of Y will decrease. And the second thing is that if you increase the capital endowment and Y is the capital intensive good, then the production of Y will increase and the production of X will decrease. So this is what is known as the Rybczynski theorem, keeping in mind the commodity prices are unchanged. This is important. Commodity prices are not changing, but these things are happening. Here in the second point, you can see this, that Rybczynski theorem postulates at a constant commodity price, an increase in the endowment of one factor, it can be either labor or it can be either capital, will increase by a greater proportion of output of the commodity intensive in that factor. If X is intensive in labor, X will increase by a greater proportion. If Y is capital intensive, Y will increase at a greater proportion and will reduce the output of the other commodity. The other commodity output will decline. This is what is the Rybczynski theorem. Question comes from this. The last two things is the specific factor model and the gravity model. These are the final two models that you need to know. Specific factor model was introduced by Paul Samulelson and Ronald Jones in the early 1970s. It is just a building block over Ricardo and Heckscher-Ohlin. So he tried to build up on the models or like Ricardo model and the Heckscher-Ohlin model to analyze short-run trade effects. It extends Ricardian model by incorporating more than one factor. So in specific factor model, what we do, we usually take two goods but 3 factors of production. Suppose one good is cloth, and suppose one good is food. So if you have these two goods, suppose X is cloth and Y is food. Now what we say? We say, suppose capital is the factor which is specific to the production of cloth. You cannot use capital to produce food. Land on the other hand is a factor. So land is generally, not to confuse it with labor, it is generally written as T. Land is also a factor which is specifically used for production of food, but labor is a factor. It is a mobile factor which can be used for production of both cloth and food. This is the unique assumption in case of specific factor. So here we see this sector immobility of factors, sector immobility. So capital is immobile and it is restricted only to the cloth sector. Land is immobile and is specific to the food production. So see, more than one factor of production. Here you have 3 factors of production and sector-specific immobility is introduced. So labor is the only mobile factor which can either be used for cloth production and food production, and the rest of the 2 factors are completely sector immobile. That is the assumption. Now, if this happens, what will be the outcomes? The outcomes are summarized in these 3 points. Many questions, if question comes, they usually come from the outcomes of the specific factor model. So see, what this theory tells you is that trade benefits the specific factor used intensively in the export sector, only in the export sector, not in the. So for example, if capital is the specific factor that you use for your cloth production and your nation is exporting cloth, then due to the trade, this capital factor will be benefited. The specific factor that you use for the production of the good, that will be benefited. Similarly, if your nation is exporting food, if you are the exporting nation, it will hold only for the exporting nation. If you are producing and exporting food, then what will happen due to international trade? The specific factor that you have used for the production of food, that is the land here, this factor will be benefited and all the other factors will lose. So this is the main, outcome, key finding of this model. Also, there are some other things that owners of the specific factor may gain or lose. There, depending on the goods become expensive or cheaper. So what will happen to the owner, whether he will gain or lose, that we cannot predict from the model. That depends on situation to situation. This will vary from situation to situation. So we can only say about the specific factor. We cannot say about the owner of the specific factor. Also, the mobile factor, which is the labor. Labor is the mobile factor. It can go to this and this. So labor, since it is a mobile factor, it will also experience ambiguous effect. So the wage of the labor will increase or not, we don't know. This is ambiguous. The wages, the profit or the profit and loss situation of the owners of the specific factor, that also we don't know. But only thing that we can be sure of 100% is that the reward for the capital, basically the rent for per unit of capital, and the reward for the landlord, basically the landlord gets the rental price, basically the price that he gets for the land. So that will definitely increase. For the other things, we do not know. So this is the prediction of the specific factor model. And the final thing that I wanted to share with you is the gravity model. So gravity model was proposed by Jan Tinbergen in the year 1962. It is just an empirical model. It is not theoretically proven. Later on, many economists have tried to prove this theoretically, but gravity model, when it was propounded, it was just an empirical observation. In his 1962 work, Shaping the World Economy, Tinbergen introduced this gravity model as an empirical tool to analyze bilateral trade flow. So this gravity model helps you to find out if there are two different nations, what will be the degree of the trade flow between these two nations. Bilateral trade flow. Bilateral trade flow between the two nations will be predicted by this gravity model. It predicts the result is as follows. Result is the countries with larger economies whose size is large. Basically, it is inspired by the Newton's gravitational force law. Newton's law, basically, where Newton said gravitational force will be more if the mass of the product will be more and the distance is less. Absolutely the same concept here, that countries with larger economies means whose GDP is high, will trade more because they produce and consume more. And the countries that are closer together, if the distance between the country is less, then they will trade more because of transportation, communication costs are lower. And with this respect, you have a general equation for this gravity model, which looks something like this. The bilateral trade flow between these two countries, that is, suppose this is the ith country, this is the jth country. If this is the two country, the bilateral trade flow between these two countries given by Tij, that will be simply a constant of A into the GDP of the ith nation into the absolute value of the GDP of the second nation upon the distance, upon the distance between the two nations. Right? So if you see, if the GDP of the first nation goes up, bilateral trade will go up because it is in the numerator and also in the multiplicative form. Similarly, if the GDP of the second nation goes up, then also the bilateral trade will go up. It is also in the numerator and the multiplicative form. But see, if the Dij goes up, this is the distance between the two nations. If this goes up, then the bilateral trade will come down. Why? If the distance is more, trade will be less because transportation cost and the communication cost, this will come into the picture. But if the nation's GDP is higher, they will produce more, they will consume more. That is why bilateral trade will also be more. So please prepare this equation and some of the important things which we have discussed, right? So thank you so much for your time. This is all I wanted to share in this video. If you have any questions anywhere, you can let me know. So this is all about the international trade theories. I have tried to give you a revision session. proper revision where I have touched upon all the important aspects of international economics, trade, basically trade theories that we need for our exam. And in the next video, I'm planning to give you the balance of payment and some associated concepts of that. So stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for your time. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe this channel, like this channel, and do join the Telegram group where you will find this note and also some practice questions associated to that. Right? So thank you so much, and let's meet you in some other video.